Hello again, it's Milt with Bejan Living Like a Boss. August 29, 2023, and just going to do a little update on the teardown of this old 1929 unstyled John Deere D. A lot of problems are coming out of it, but we're getting her done. First off, previously I pushed both of these pistons out of the block there, and these rings on both pistons were pretty much seized up. I had pretty good success getting the rings freed up on this piston. They're all freed up. I freed them up with basically hot water and just kind of like tickling them around, and they did come free. The second piston never had really much luck. I got the first one without damaging it, and the other four compression rings, they didn't come free at all, because this was the worst piston. It was halfway down the bore. It had 2 or 3 inches to come out of the tail of the bore, so it was right packed full of rust over time. It was just more difficult, so the rings broke. Plus, the thickness of the rings are quite a bit thinner than these ones, so these are newer rings than what was in here. These are worn pretty thin, so whatever happened in the history of the mechanical world in this tractor, I think that one or the other pistons was out and they put new rings on it. The reason being that they had the block off the tractor and they had it cracked or broken somehow. We'll just do a little close-up of that. I don't know if it's visible on the camera, but this block was cracked a couple places in this webbing. It looks like nickel welding to me, and even in the bore here where the gasket surface is, that's been ground away and repaired and welded up. In along the inside of the bore, it's hard to see either, but the welding went in here and made a kind of like a J-hook pattern to it. They welded up this bore and crudely ground away this area here. And yeah, it's been welded up in that regard there. This whole working area here, that 2 inches, the piston does not see that. It does not come up into there, so the piston wouldn't be bothered, the rings wouldn't be bothered with it. So it worked for them, and I'm thinking it's gonna still be intact. So I'm just gonna clean up this bore, both of these bores, with a ball hone, clean her up as best I can, and throw those pistons back in there with a new set of rings, and we'll just see what happens. Further into it, I managed to get this connecting rod, both of them actually. I pressed out the wrist pins out of both of them. This one would have been the tougher one. The wrist pin was actually seized onto the bushing of the connecting rod, so it was a tough push. The other one here was free on the connecting rod, and it pushed out of the piston fairly easy. It was in good shape in that regard. But the far one over here, that rod needs a little bit of cleaning up and work, maybe new bushings or whatever. We'll determine that later on. It took a little doing to recover this camshaft out of the crankcase. You can see all the rust. This gear was just sitting in a pocket of rust for I don't know who knows how long. But here's evidence of somebody else being into this tractor from before. These bolts, I do believe, are end-for-ended. And on top of it, there's a lock washer here. There's a lock washer on the other end. Just made it hard to get these bolts to back off. The square drive of the head is supposed to be locked into the flat part of the hub, so you don't need a backup wrench on it, but I needed a backup wrench just to break these bolts loose. We got them backed off, but we'll get them out of there and clean them up and put them back in the way it should be done. but we'll have to clean that gear up. And on top of cleaning the gear up, I'm going to look for some timing marks. So far I have not seen any timing marks on any of these gears, which is fine because just by the way the simplicity of the tractor is. But for sure there should be a timing mark between the crankcase and the cam gear drive. The cam is in pretty rough shape. I'm going to have to send it in and get it all polished up. I don't think there's any material like lifting off of it, but we just got to get it cleaned up. The bushing areas are in really bad shape up here at the top, black, like an H2S was sitting in there, like gas, like a rotten gas, like just corroding things. Everything's pretty black and disgusting. The two the camshaft covers were hard to get out because they were locked right onto the camshaft. The camshaft was seized on these. But yeah, just a matter of getting these things cleaned up. They'll be fine to run again. This is an example of this is out of the sump. It's in pretty good condition considering it's popped apart here a little bit from water and frost, I suppose. But it's got this crap just embedded right on it. It's just going to be a job to clean that out. This is the oil pump, and this is actually the culprit that was stopping everything from turning. This pump is just totally locked up. It's totally rusted and crusty. I haven't cleaned anything off it yet. And the other side here, oh, now we got sawdust in it. The other side is totally froze up and full of gunk, like crusty, scaly stuff. It's solid, so it's going to have to be carefully pressed apart. This is the idler gear that sends the power from the crankshaft up through it into the governor housing. It doesn't really need any timing marks per se, but I had trouble getting this out of this mounting where it belongs. It just goes right in there and it slides in there, just like so. But when I took it out, it was all seized up on the shaft and the bushing, so it couldn't come out. And I don't know if we can see down here, the casting has a sharp edge down here. So the cogs of the gear would not come by there as I slipped it out. Normally you would slip out the drive shaft or the idler shaft and then the gear would come out. But this is all seized together, so it's not coming out. So I just had to take my angle grinder and a flapper wheel and just take off the bottom corner of this casting. And that allowed the whole thing to come out as one unit, seized up. And of course I did take it apart. Had to press it apart. So now the shaft is its own self, but by itself, and the bushing is actually in the gear where it's supposed to be. When I pushed it apart, the bushing came with the shaft, and I had to heat the shaft up with the torch enough so it would release off the shaft. Then I cleaned it up, and then it goes back together and turns freely. Now on this shaft there's a little pin that sticks out, and I doubt if you can see it in the camera, but there's a detent in the casting where that lines up to hold that shaft from turning, and there's a flat spot on the top that catches oil, and it transfers or lets the oil drain inside, so it'll lubricate that bushing. So that was another problem, but it's all fixed up now. We got that freed up and almost cleaned up. I still got to clean up a lot of the rust and the debris or the oil and scrunge off the gear, but that's pretty much ready to go. Inside the crankcase, you can see where that cam gear is sat for many years is full of red rust. Over to the main part of the crankcase, it's still got thick, gooey material, grunge all over. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scrape all that out and use the wash gun, kind of clean her up as best I can. Then we'll get after these journals. I'm just going to buff them up a little bit and then use emery cloth, polish them up. I managed to press apart this oil pump successfully without breaking anything. It's still really dirty. I gotta clean up everything really good. Gasket is still partially intact here. You'll just clean that up. This is the main bore where the drive shaft would go in, which is this. It would be in through that way. This keyway looks a little tweaked, like it's been twisted around. I don't know if I did that. I probably did, trying to force the pistons to move while everything was together. Being that this here is the culprit, where it was seized solid, is not going to turn unless something broke, of which I think it was trying to twist the shaft off. This here gear was pressed on through the keyway and everything and held on with just a cotter pin. It is really dirty and rusty. It's going to have to be saved because there ain't no other ones laying around here, so we've got to clean it up best we can and reuse it. So there's the shaft with the gear, the drive gear. The working part of the oil pump is good enough shape, just got to be all cleaned up. The slave gear that goes with it is going to have to be cleaned up, and it'll work and pump oil again. The body where these sit has a bunch of corrosion and rust, and that'll be cleaned up, polished up with a wire wheel and whatever it takes to clean them up. This here one goes through that hole there. The shaft that the slave gear rolls around, and it goes on this end pretty easy, but it's actually supposed to ride on this end where it looks like there's a little bit of a bushing there. And so that's all got to be buffed up, cleaned up, and it's got to be pressed back in through this way. And so the slave gear will run on it here. So anyway, a lot of work to do there. I successfully pressed that all apart with my little 10-ton press here. Had to do a little heat to these things to get the things to release. The 10-ton press was not going to be enough there on its own, so I put a little bit of a torch to it, heated them up, and they come apart pretty good. I did clean up the cam gear somewhat, and I did find, and it's hard to see, but there's a notch there in the root of this here cog, and so that would be the timing mark. There's only one mark on this gear, and that's it, and it's to time the cam to the crankshaft. I have to confirm where that mark is on the crankshaft yet. I'm waiting for a service manual to explain exactly where that would be, so I believe I know where it is, but I got to confirm it. Took the bolts out of the cam gear, and we'll clean everything up and put them in the right way, finish cleaning these things up. But anyway, that's where we are today. Gonna wrap it up here, call her good. It's just a bunch of wire wheeling, washing, and so on and so forth. We're going to clean everything up and start putting things back together that we can put back together. We'll catch up to you later. I am finding out exactly how good of a friend the internet is, namely social media. Facebook, for example, I joined a Unstyled D page on the Facebook and already getting lots of info. Number one is the clamp styled hood had stopped being produced at the serial number 68,879, so that brought my year serial numbers down quite considerably. And so yeah, just thought I'd mention that social media is certainly your friend these days. And also a person down there at Chilliwack just sent me a note that he could probably help me out, so that's a lot closer than any of the lower 48 states, that's for sure. So we'll catch up to you later. He's all good. Bye for now.